Hello, everyone. Today we will be starting to talk about civil assessment. And just like the criminal assessment chapter, this is a longer lecture, so I'm going to break it up into smaller digestible chunks so you can watch them as you have time to do so. So we are going to start by talking about domestic relations. And this is, again, part of the civil branch of the judicial system. There are no juries here. Usually all decisions are made by the judge or by some sort of assistant acting for the judge. These people can essentially do everything a judge does but sign off. These are sometimes called referees or magistrates. The decisions here are technically appealable, but it's actually rarely done. It's unlikely that it will be overturned, and you would just have to deal with the same judge again, essentially. So we'll start by talking about custody evaluations. As you can imagine, these are one of the more difficult areas where psychologists have to be a part of things. My graduate advisor did some of these evals, and she said that although they were rewarding, they were very difficult at times as well. So we're going to be talking about the difference between legal and physical custody. So legal custody is where you make decisions related to the child and you're responsible for the child. Where physical custody is where the child actually lives. Joint custody is where each parent has equal authority to make decisions about the child. And you can also examine access of non-custodial parents to the children, so through visitation, for example. A lot of courts have standard visitations, and this will vary from area to area, but for example, it might be something like the non-custodial parent gets to see the child every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 to 9 p.m., and every other weekend from 6 p.m. Friday to 6 p.m. Sunday. You can also look at temporary versus permanent custody. So temporary custody is often during the proceedings, and this is almost always given to the mother. And in that case, whoever the temporary parent is, they have the right to make decisions about the kids, even though their marriage is still intact. They don't have to consult the other parent. And then the permanent custody, sort of a misnomer. It's never technically permanent. After 12 months, custody can be reopened, or it can reopen at any time if the children are thought to be in danger. So for some statistics, for some cohorts, 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce, and a third to a half of couples who divorce have kids under 18. So they are going to then come under the jurisdiction of the domestic relations court, and custody must be approved by the court. About 70 to 90% of divorcing parents actually will reach an agreement about custody. Therefore, mental health professionals are not involved in most custody cases, even contested ones. Psychologists are going to get involved in the most contested, the toughest cases, and they are going to try to help that trier of fact, be they the judge, the magistrate, make decisions. Attorneys and judges typically do not place great value on mental health testimony in custody cases. They do take into account that report. So what is the justification for psychological assessment or involvement here? There is the Uniform Marriage and Divorce Act of 1979. This was a set of guidelines made by a group representing all the states. Custody decisions are made in the best interest of the child. This is really the guiding principle in general, but especially for psychologists who are conducting these assessments. And this is based on a number of factors, including, quote, the mental and physical health of all individuals involved, end quote. And so this justifies the involvement of psychologists in this process. So they want to look at the wishes of the parents, of the child, how the family interacts, the child's adjustment to home, school, and community. The Michigan Child Custody Act, 1970, 1993, is the model for state laws and standards. It's in the best interest of the child, and it's based on several things: love, affection, and emotional ties between the parent and the child, capacity and disposition of the parents to give the child love, affection, guidance, and continuation of educating and raising the child in a religion or creed if they have one. Capacity and disposition to provide the child with food, clothing, medical care, and other material needs. Length of time child has lived in a stable, satisfactory environment, and desirability of maintaining continuity. This becomes critical in many cases. The court is really reluctant to interrupt parent-child relationships that are going well. The permanence as a family unit of the home, moral fitness of both the parties, and then this is the one where we can really get involved from the Michigan Child Custody Act, mental and physical health of the parties involved, homeschool and community record of the child, reasonable preferences of the child, so if the court determines the child to be of sufficient age to express preference, that is, willingness and ability of parents to encourage close child-parent relationship between the child and the other parent if appropriate, and any other factor the court considers relevant. So when you do custody evaluations, my graduate instructor in forensic psych, Jack Graham, told us that your goal is to provide information to the court to help in determining custody and visitation arrangements that will most likely assure that the child's present and future needs are met. So you're doing this in the best interest of the child. You're gonna get information. This can take in a lot of different forms. You want to assure present and future needs are met. So you want to find out what the kids need. You've got to ask them. Ask the people involved. They're going to be universals, obviously: safety, education, love, security, stability, guidance. And then there'll be some unique ones. So there might be some problematic things to kids within this. You can have kids within the same family that have different needs. And how does that work? You can have split custody. You need to think about things like special education, physical disability, mental retardation, medical treatment, psychological treatment, parenting style necessary, and also the future. What will the kids need as they get older? So there are lots of possibilities for how psychologists can be a part of this. No role. You should not get involved. Psychologists have nothing to offer, some people would say. This is really hard to argue when, as we've seen, mental health is part of the custody criteria. The psychologist should serve as an investigator and report facts, but offer no opinions. The psychologist should offer opinions about factors identified in child custody statuses, but no opinions about child custody arrangements. The psychologist should offer opinions about custody or visitation arrangements in the best interest of the child, the ultimate issue. The psychologists who do these type of assessments argue that they are actually the most qualified to make these recommendations. In most cases, the court will determine what the role the psychologist will have. And if you work for the court, which is often the case, you will know this. Most important thing is that the assessor needs to be competent to assess the needs of children. They need to have experience in training in so doing. This involves things like knowing what is appropriate at what developmental stage. So for example, for a child to wet the bed at 2 is pretty normal, but for a child to wet the bed at 12 is maladaptive, right? So those who are developmental psychologists have a lot more training in these types of issues, especially child clinical psychologists. The APA guidelines for custody evaluations in divorce proceedings are very specific because these can be so contentious. So the purpose of the evaluation is to assist in determining the psychological best interests of the child. Again, you'll hear that over and over because that really is the point. The child's welfare is paramount. The evaluation focuses on parenting attributes, the child's psychological needs, and the resulting fit between the two of those. So you start with the needs of the child, you look at the related parenting characteristics, and you say, what's the best fit for the child's needs? And there's usually no perfect solution, to be perfectly honest. You're often choosing sort of the lesser of two evils. Psychologists strive to gain and maintain specialized competence for doing these types of evaluations. So they have training and awareness of laws. Psychologists strive to function as impartial evaluators. It's legitimate to describe the person and the personality characteristics, but you have to monitor your own values and perceptions. Psychologists strive to avoid conflicts of interest in multiple relationships. So you should not serve as both therapist and assessor for your client. You should definitely not try to do this for a family member or a friend. You can just imagine how much of that could blow up in your face. And this is honestly the most common violation of the APA code in general, much less in these types of cases. And it's really hard, as you can imagine, for someone who lives in a smaller town. You might be the only psychologist in town, so you have to then refer them out if you know them. Psychologists strive to establish the scope of the evaluation in the timely fashion, consistent with the nature of the referral question. So always you want to interview the parents and kids, but sometimes there are other people, if there was a nanny, if there are grandparents who are very involved. And it's best if everyone you evaluate is court-ordered to do so, so they'll cooperate. Psychologists strive to obtain appropriately informed consent. A signed consent form is your best bet here, and you're going to tell people exactly what will happen, and they have signed and said they get it. Psychologists strive to employ multiple methods of data gathering. You want to do interviews, tests, record review, observations. You want to verify everything you can, document everything. Psychologists strive to interpret data in a manner consistent with the context of the evaluation. Psychologists strive to complement the evaluation with appropriate combination of examinations. Psychologists strive to base their recommendations, if any, upon the psychological best interest of the child. And psychologists create and maintain professional records in accordance with ethical and legal obligations. Basically, you just want to write down everything. So how do you do the evaluation? The steps are evaluating the child's needs, evaluating relevant characteristics of parents and other significant adults, especially those that bear on the parent's capacity to meet the needs of a particular child, and then matching those child's needs and capacities to significant others to meet the child's needs. So this is the hardest part, because sometimes it will really be neither parent. And in that case, you might need to look at, like, should the grandparents have custody instead? So in terms of sources of information, you want to do an interview, everyone who has a relevant role, kids, parents, teachers, therapists, whomever, neighbors if they're relevant. You can do this via phone. You want to do observation in your office, usually, for practical reasons. Parents would be on their best behavior, but sometimes they're not able to hold it together, even when the short time when they know they're being watched. So it can be really telling. And then you form impressions of the interactions. You look at records, you look at school, treatment records, legal records, everything that's relevant within the limits of time that you can actually spend on the evaluation. So you want to limit what you look at from parents. For example, 10 pages, you can say, I'll review from you. And usually these will be records of what the other parent did. But the key is to treat everyone the same. So if one parent gives you 10 pages of record, the other parent is also allowed to give you 10 pages of records. Psychological testing is actually the least important source of information on these evaluations. But if it's done, you often use the MMPI. So one study found that 84% of child custody evals did use the MMPI or other personality tests. On the MMPI too, you need to be aware of test-taking attitudes, look at those validity scales, but especially defensiveness. So both parents want the kid usually, so they're going to present themselves in the best light. And it's so common to do this in child custody evals that if people are not defensive, you almost want to worry about that. Maybe they don't want custody, or maybe they're so disturbed they can't pick up on the fact that they should be defensive. Because we know people go in so defensive, there are actually separate norms we use on the MMPI too for custody cases. Look at things like defensiveness, positive self-presentation. So you want to compare it to studies that have been done specifically for custody evaluations. There is limited research concerning the MMPI and parenting, so we don't know much in general about how psych evaluations predict effective parenting in general. Now, some relevant characteristics, and note that none of these actually preclude getting custody, are important. And again, to think about the child's specific needs. So, mental retardation, you need to think about that. Is the parent abusing substances? What's the severity? Are they willing to get treatment or have they sought treatment already? How does it compare to the other parent? Sometimes both parents are using and one is worse. Serious psychopathology. Here's what they're like clinically. How does that match with the child's needs? If it's a very significant problem, the court will usually figure it out without psychological help. You also want to look at relevant personality characteristics. And these tend to be related to parenting in general. Experts on parenting would include these in their descriptions of effective parents: capacity to give and receive love, empathy, emotional maturity, structure or limit setting, flexibility versus rigidity, recognizing kids are people, right? Judgment, impulse control, frustration tolerance, and self-esteem. All right, so that's child custody evals, and there will be a couple other short lectures for this chapter. So I hope that this was enlightening, and please go on and enjoy the next video.